Magic of the internet, and we are back. Hello, everybody. I'm Dan Schmidt. Thank you for joining us for Deer Talk Now, episode number 152. I'm here with my crack podcast producer, Ian Sanchez. Today, we're going to be talking deer, obviously, because it's Deer Talk Now, but we're also going to be talking about wolves again. Hot topic across the country, especially here in my home state of Wisconsin. But I know if you're in Wyoming, you're dealing with it. Colorado, you're dealing with it. Minnesota, Michigan, a lot of people are dealing with it. And today's guest is Chris Vaughan. Chris is with Hunter Nation. Chris, I had the pleasure of meeting you here just not too long ago, and I understand we not only have some similarities as to where you live now and where I grew up, but also your work with Hunter Nation on some of the predator issues that are facing not only our state here in Wisconsin, but North America. Welcome to Deer Talk Now.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It's my pleasure, Dan. Happy to be here, and thank you for the invite.
So give us a little bit of a background, the listeners and the viewers. If you guys haven't watched the video versions, they're on YouTube. They're all over the place, Facebook. But give the viewers and the listeners a little bit of a snapshot into what you are working on currently.
Yeah, so at the state level, so Hunter Nation is a national organization. We have two arms, a 501c3 and a C4, so a membership side of things, and then also where we can get in on the political side of things. Not specific to a party. We don't endorse candidates. We don't endorse a political party, but we do endorse policy. And so that's been at the forefront of what I've been doing. We're working on this on a national level to get a federal delisting, but certainly that affects the Great Lakes. Here in the state of Wisconsin, where I reside, in the southeast portion of the state, we don't have a huge population or any measurable population of wolves here in the southeast, but it impacts our entire state. We have, similar to Colorado, we have a voting base of 3 counties down in the southeast with Waukesha County, Dane County, and Milwaukee County. That's 60% of our population. And so when you take public preference, when you take voting, habits, in many instances, it doesn't favor, our lifestyle. And so, we kind of follow the mantra of God, family, country, constitution, and that's across the board for all hunting rights. At the forefront, recently has been predator management, specifically the wolf management plan. That passed back in 2023. We've been intimately involved with that from day one, and I spent most of my efforts last year attending assembly hearings, Senate hearings, testifying, generally in opposition to the wolf management plan that passed through our NRB in October of last year, mainly for 2 reasons. Numeric population goal, the lack thereof, and we have issues with the buffer zones that they've outlined. And ultimately this is through an adaptive management process that we'll talk through that is different from our wolf management plan that we had that was last updated in 1999 before 2023.
So let's talk about that for a minute, because I do remember that. I remember it all the way back when they started working on this. And my number, I'm going to stay there because I remember it. It was 250 wolves until we had a management plan. Then it was 350. Then it was 550. Then it was 750. Then it's like, let's just say we want more or less. And that's what we're going to talk about with adaptive management, which I disagree with on most levels. But what happened there specifically where this just kept getting kicked down the road to where we never really got any management plan in place here?
And you're exactly right with those numbers. So when I got involved, the number was 350, and I testified in support of that number. So we can go back a little bit. So the last update was 1999. So no issues with the update. In order for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services to have confidence that the state of Wisconsin can properly manage an apex predator, specifically the wolf, at a state level once a delisting occurs, an updated management plan does make sense. So, there was a few years into the making of that, a year into passing that plan, which ultimately was October of 2023. But our initial biggest concern was the lack of a numeric population goal. So we started at that point, and I testified in support of the number of 350. Why support a numeric population goal? Well, look at the gray wolf in the state of Wisconsin. It's the single greatest recovery story that we have. This species was nearly eliminated, if not completely eliminated, off of our landscape. We had, population goals in place in a wolf management plan, and look at where we're at, now. we can talk about the population and maybe the issue or the concerns we have over the population. Or now, and for this year, we don't even have a population goal. First time in 44 years, the DNR didn't provide that to us. Um, but I look at it from the landscape, the habitat, and the population. Most wolves in this state were born under the protection of the ESA. We've had 4 hunts, in the last, 10, 12 years. So we've removed less than 800 wolves off the landscape through legal harvest of hunting and trapping. Um, and those numbers continue to grow year over year under a wildly successful plan. So we support that as hunters, as trappers, as farmers. We like certainty. We work in absolutes in many instances. I know how many tags I have in my pocket. I know the season dates. I know my shooting hours. Um, we have a lot of rules, which is another discussion, maybe for later. But I know, and I work in those certainties of what we have, and to have a very fluid or nondescript adaptive management plan, which this isn't new. Adaptive management works.
Right.
In this instance, I see glaring holes and the massive opportunity for once a delisting occurs that we are not prepared as a state to have a constitutionally protected wolf hunt because of the lack of the first two things that this adaptive management plan they already haven't done. And it's been 16 or 17 months now since the NRB passed this plan. So we are painfully behind and close to a delisting, in my opinion.
Now, this has happened across the country. We've seen it in other states, but and I know what happened was it became a political issue. We had a liberal judge here in Wisconsin who basically stonewalled conservation. I should preface all of this by saying we don't hate wolves. We love
Oh,
wolves. The wolves deserve to be managed just like any other um, animal, and they're not being managed. So how? I know with Hunter Nation, you guys are actually you have boots on the ground in Madison working on this. How did this become such a political, a polarizing subject?
well, every hearing I attend and testify at personally, whether it's the Assembly or the Senate, we are painfully outgunned. You look at it. So I was at the Clearinghouse Senate hearing on March 4th. I think there was four other organizations that were there in opposition to this Clearinghouse rule, which is that the current management plan, and I don't even like to call it a management plan. This is a protection plan. There's not a ton of management in this. It's absolutely still protecting the wolves, but we are the the vocal minority here for sure. You look at the example of Sierra Club. They're always there. Just the Wisconsin chapter alone has 8,000 members.
Wow.
Just that's one organization. And so you have multiple organizations, and you said it exactly right, Dan. We don't want to remove wolves from the landscape. They belong here. They deserve to be here. We respect the tribal influence and the history of the wolf across the board, and that's what we're up against. With these pro-wolf, anti-hunting animal rights activists, they are completely opposed to what we do as a lifestyle and sometimes as part of our job. And that's the biggest difference here is that we are flexible in this because since I've testified in support of a numeric population goal of 350, we actually passed it through the Assembly and the Senate that, okay, well, don't specifically put the number on there, but just require the number. We will still, trust that the DNR gives us an accurate number, which they haven't done, that says, but include that number specifically. We do it for bears. We say there should be, 11,300 bears on our landscape. And they're managed adaptively as well. So, that is the biggest part. And now with these anti-hunters and animal rights activists, they know now because we sued the DNR to have that wolf hunt 4 or 5 years ago now. They know that they can't stop wolf hunting. That's done. It's constitutionally protected. It's a done deal. But what they can do, similar to the gun industry, is they can make it very hard on us. They can fight for this vague adaptive management that has a preference over public opinion over science. The public preference, number of times that's listed in the wolf management plan, it's a staggering number. It's about public preference over science and biology in many instances, whether it's through trapping regulations, baiting, optics, snow machines, things like that. They can make that very, very difficult, just like in the gun industry. They're not going to ban guns, but they can make it very hard for us, whether it's taxes on ammunition, guns, things like that. So that's absolutely what we're up against are these organizations that have thousands and thousands of people, very deep pockets that historically don't reside in wolf territory, just like we saw in Colorado.
Just like we saw in Colorado. And I'm going to list it. You got PETA, you have the Humane Society, you've got, was it the Sierra Club?
Center for Biological Diversity is probably one of the biggest.
So you've got at least those four. And what people, if you're listening to this, you might think, well, I don't care about wolves. They don't affect me. They're not by me. You should, because this conversation, which I promise I won't get to today, because we could sit here for 6 hours and talk about this. This conversation, number one, let's keep it to the predators, like Chris said. Go to Florida. You can't shoot a bear in Florida. They have no season, and they are overrun with black bears. You talk to anybody in Florida, between the black bears and the feral hogs, forget about turkeys, forget about deer. And then when we go back to the adaptive management, my biggest problem with it is sitting on the sidelines, seeing what has happened with wolves, is that when you do have the number, whether it's 250 or 350, it bothers me because we had the deal. This was the deal. The deal is this. Once we get there, then you can manage it. But then you get to the adaptive management, the part that I really despise, is that it becomes this tool where you can get these mealy-mouthed people in there saying, well, there's so many different stakeholders. No, the hunters, and well, number one, it shouldn't even have to do with the hunters. It should do with the, I'm sorry, I was a little over-caffeinated this morning. It needs to deal with the animal itself, and we've done it with deer. And when you start managing it saying more or less or about the same, that's not scientific management. And you can't do that with wolves either. You can't say, well, public opinion. And now in our state, Madison, Milwaukee, if they're the ones who are deciding whether we have wolves, if you live somewhere else, and let's take this over to Wyoming, they want to bring wolves in there, and you got ranchers out there who have thousands of acres of cattle ground. You see where these problems come from. So bless your heart, number one, because I know you guys, you're not getting paid to do this. These are volunteers mostly on Hunter Nation and the people on the good guys' side trying to fight for what's right. But what I really, like I said, what I really have a problem with deer and deer hunting, we have preached scientific management over all the years. And when they got rid of population estimates, density estimates, true harvest numbers, yeah, we call the stuff in, but you took, that was something that was so precision with a laser to now where you're just kind of, I've seen it. I mean, with the almanac, when we used to ask people down in, no, don't get bent out of shape about this, Alabama and Georgia, when I used to ask them 30 years ago for their harvest information, the guy from Alabama would say, well, what did Georgia say? And the guy from Georgia would say, what did Alabama say? Well,
Sure.
how many deer did they harvest? You cannot manage. Now they've changed since then, but you cannot manage precisely by doing that, and you can't do it with wolves either. So, Chris, that all being said, where do you see the immediate future on that topic with wolves? Will we see additional hunting and trapping opportunities?
I think so. I mean, I do think we are close to a federal delisting. So, Congress passed, what was previously called Trust the Science. So our representative in District 7, Congressman Tom Tiffany and Lauren Boebert out of Colorado, introduced Trust the Science, passed Congress, did not make it into the Senate. We had a massive push, and I'm really proud of our efforts of our Hunter Nation folks, because we got the football closer to the goal line before the election, last year by reaching out to Tester and Schumer and Baldwin, and really we needed bipartisan support in the Senate a year ago to get this introduced. Ultimately, it did not get introduced. So this year we carried it over, and now it's called the Pet and Livestock Safety Act. So it's literally the exact same bill that Congressman Tiffany and Boebert put out last year. So I believe on Tuesday next week they're going to. It doesn't require a hearing because there's no changes in there, So there won't be necessarily a vote on that. So it will go through Congress, and I do believe we have the support to get it introduced into the Senate. So what's important about this one is that it's a federal delisting, but the biggest piece of it is that it reduces judicial, or not reduces, it eliminates judicial review. And that's what we saw back in 2020, 2021. We had not a state judge that told us, that
California judge.
overturned that.
Yeah.
Yeah, California judge overturned that. So you have a liberal judge in the state of California that said we are no longer allowed to hunt. We're not going to have that fall hunt that's constitutionally protected in the state of Wisconsin. So, we had what I call a successful hunt, earlier in that year in February. I say successful if you do a Google or DuckDuckGo search on Wisconsin wolf hunt, it will take you 6 pages to find an article that is supportive of that. And that came up in my testimony earlier this year by one of the senators that this was an atrocity on all levels, and we were an international embarrassment that the international media, picked up on this. But the reality is that the quota was 200 wolves, and 218 were harvested. If there is a group that decides to not harvest their tags, the DNR said that harvest quota was 200 and 200. So you're less than 10%, which is well within the margin of where we should be, of that. So, that was a successful hunt. And look at what happened. I mean, it was less than 3 days that those 218 wolves were harvested. So that says a lot of things. Yeah, it was great conditions, great snow, good tracking. So it was an ideal 3 days of hunting, but it also speaks to the level of the population and where it was at during that time frame. And now, I'm quite confident that we will get a delisting, and then not so, I'd say in the near future. My concern, and I have a concern with the other Great Lakes, states, is this state prepared? We're missing two key components. We do not have a wolf advisory committee, and that is one of the number one components that's needed under the adaptive management plan. The second is that the DNR never produced an overwinter wolf population goal, estimate, or pack size. That's the first time that's ever happened since they've started tracking this in 44 years. So so deep down, my concern is, yes, okay, we have a constitution protected hunt, but the DNR says, well, we don't have enough data. The committee hasn't had a chance to review, everything. We were not able to provide the public with the population goals. So we're going to put the number at 0. We're going to put the number at 2. We're going to put it at 10. 50% of those tags go to the tribes. So we're going to allow, 5 wolves to be harvested. And so that's my overall concern, is where we were at if a delisting, does occur. But before that, we do need to get HR 845, the Pet and Livestock Safety Act. That does need to pass the Senate. So when that is delisted, we won't have a judge come in and overturn that, because they'll have time to do that.
Would that be the case for other states, or is that unique here because we've already been through the process?
This one's because it's federal. So I mean, we have it within our state constitution that they can't, that the hunt has to happen. But removing judicial review, that would be on the federal level.
Is that the same for Wyoming and Montana and?
Well, already in, and I can't speak to at a high level of where they're at with the Rocky Mountains. Other than that, I believe their conditions are, I think they don't receive some federal funding, and it's because it's already managed at the state level. So they are able to do that. So with that listing, I think is pretty well safe.
Deer Talk Now is brought to you by Traditions. As you probably know, 2 years ago they came out with the Nitro Fire in collaboration with Federal Premium and Hodgdon. The fire stick, they shoot through those guns. This has really changed muzzleloading and has made it more safer, more accurate. Check them out today at traditionsfirearms.com.
So if you guys are wondering, again, like you say, well, what does this have to do with deer? It has everything to do with deer, especially if you hunt in the northern forest. I grew up hunting in Bayfield and Ashland County. If you guys have ever been up there, if you've ever tried to deer hunt up there, you know how difficult it is. And now you throw wolves into the mix. Do they wipe out the entire deer population? No, they do not. However, if you are hunting private land up there, good luck, because if you have wolves, they can definitely alter deer behavior. But to Chris's point, that hunt we had here 3 or 4, how many years ago it was? It wasn't that long ago. What trappers and hunters did, and the trappers were is insanely efficient, by the way, in that season. 3 days, 218 wolves. Think about that for a second. 72 counties in Wisconsin, 218 wolves on a population that was originally only supposed to be 250 before that. And we did it in 3 days. So you don't have to be a mathematician, which I'm not. That's why I went into journalism, to understand exactly how many wolves were there 4 years ago as opposed to where it is now. So that's it. The population is too high. It does affect deer populations. Affecting deer populations to where we want them, and we are a majority, is the deer populations are fewer in the North Woods. I want to talk to you a little bit here, Chris, about that adaptive management, and I did pull out a couple quotes here, and this is where my I wanted to read something here. One example of adaptive management can be found in environmental conservation. Wildlife managers use it to balance the population of certain species, starting with a particular approach like limiting hunting licenses. They would monitor wildlife populations and adjust their strategy based on observed effects. I think that goes straight to what this conversation is when you have something where you cannot actually follow that crosshairs, that's when you have problems. And that's my problems with adaptive management. What would your take be on it?
And I agree with you. And those, looking on the outside that, participate from a pro-wolf side of things, they'll look at numbers and say, well, you harvested more deer this year. You didn't have a wolf hunt last year and your deer numbers were up. Well, you got to, look into that specifically and look at it in the northern regions. Like I said, I live down in the southeast. I don't have a problem with deer hunting, but I used to go. I miss the traditions of going up north. I used to hunt the UP all the time. Zero reason to go there anymore. Zero reason to take kids hunting anymore because gone are the days of sitting on a cut cornfield and you could see 100 deer per night. At least in the UP where I used to hunt. So from that outside part looking in, when you have something, that vague, and specifically up in the areas where you're talking about. We've got an event up in Ashland next Sunday, actually, where we're gonna be talking a little bit about this with the local elected officials and Congressman Tiffany and Keith Mark as well. But yeah, it's spot on. To not have this target. And the first I heard was a little glimmer of hope, because I don't have a lot of letters at the end of my name. I'm not a biologist. I am not a large carnivore specialist. I'm just a redneck hunter that likes to spend time in the woods,
That's two of us.
And so, and I talked to, that's the most of the people that we're talking to here. So when you have this biology, which makes sense, and that's the argument I get from the antis. Well, who are you? You're not a biologist. The biologist told us this, and the vast majority of these people are managing them from like we're doing right now behind a screen, and they might live up in certain areas, but to spend 30 days during the archery season, or certainly people would like to have more of that, but full days, 60 days out there, that's more of a reality than saying, well, no, the carrying capacity is there. So I have an opinion. This is my personal opinion. I think the DNR does know how many deer or how many wolves there are on the landscape, and I think it's a terrifying number for them to publish. If they told us in 2023 that there was 1,007 and we had no harvest this year, and reproduction rates, they know about what that is. They can come up with a number, but I think last year wasn't the first year we had a mild winter ever. Mild winters favor deer for sure. Heavier winters favor wolves, where they can track that. But look at the depredation numbers and look at the numbers. I have a feeling that there's a minimum of 3,000 wolves on our landscape. That's a minimum number.
Minimum.
So that said, even if you had a harvest quota of 29%, we could easily take 900 wolves
That's
out of
amazing.
the system and not make a dent. I'd say we could take 2,000 out of our landscape and not make a dent. But if you look at the biology of it and say that 29% harvest take would have no impact on the reproduction or anything like that, that says we should immediately have a season of 900 wolves, period. And that's not 450 for us and 450 for the tribes. That's 900 take.
Right.
to not have a dent in what we're doing right now.
That's the important thing to mention is that here, specifically what he's talking about, um, the tribes get half the tags. They won't kill any, from what I understand. And then when you do have that, like you said, if you said 900, well, we're going to kill 450, and that's not even a drop in the bucket. If you guys want to, Ian will put this up for you. There's a map and a great Facebook page. Corky Meyer runs this page. Do you know Corky? It's
I do know.
I think it's called the Wisconsin Wolf Count or something.
Citizen, I think it's Wisconsin Citizen Wolf Count.
No matter
Yeah.
where you live, look at this because
Yeah.
he is impartial. Basically, all he wants is people to post their trail camera photos and just mention where it is, like if it's Wapaka County or wherever, and you will see that map of the state, which is insane. It goes all the way across half the state. I know you could do this in other states as well,
Absolutely.
and I think people should be doing this because they're taking it in their own hands. If the minimum thing that you can do is, how many people are hunters that live in wolf country? You know somebody who has either seen one or got a photo of one. All you have to do is report it. Set up your own page. And that grassroots, it's kind of like Hunter Nation, a grassroots group of people saying, no, there's something not right here. You're telling me, I'm not stupid. You're telling me there's 1,000 wolves in the state. I'm smart enough to know, okay, there's 72 counties. These are the counties that have the highest deer populations. The wolves are going to go where the deer are. You can figure that out. But I guess that's an aside there. That is.
He's an amazing resource, and he shows up to every meeting and event that I have, and he has these printouts in these large scale, and it's crystal clear, and you can just follow the path south of where these wolves are showing up. But he has sent me, this goes back a few months, and I used it as an example before. He sent me pictures of, I think it was 5 on the same day. 5 different pictures, 5 different counties on the same day. Each picture had 8 to 12 wolves per picture. So you're telling me that just by chance, that's 1% of our total wolf population in those 5 to 10 pictures? It's ridiculous. It makes no sense, and you don't need to be a wildlife biologist or a large carnivore specialist to make the deduction that we have more than 1,000 wolves in the state of Wisconsin. It's insane.
Look at how many deer we have. And it's like, how many, you know what I'm saying? Like, look at how many deer we have in the landscape, and you can go out and put a camera out and not get a deer on your camera for a couple of days. They're there, It's the same thing with wolves. I completely lost my train of thought here because you can really get me moving here.
Oh, I get fired up. Yeah.
But okay, so let's just wrap it up this way, Chris.
Back to the deer camera thing real quick. How many of those pictures you see that deer trotting by, and 4 minutes later, there's your wolf.
There's a wolf.
I mean, not every single time, of course, but in the vast majority of those areas, when you get into Clark County, Lincoln County, Taylor County, Ashland, Bayfield, anything up in the Northwest, it's terrible. And these, I don't like to touch on the financial aspect because that's not why we're hunters. We don't do it for the financial gain of the state. But you talk to Ted a lot, and Ted Nugent says it great. Why can't these wolves have the ability to be an asset?
Right.
And there's an asset from the the viewing side of things too, and that's listed in the wolf management plan, which I think is, it's a small financial gain for howling expeditions and tracking and visibility. Those things do exist, and I completely support them. But look at the financial asset that wolves can bring to the DNR that's operating at what, $16 million deficit annually. Typically, when you look at when we had the wolf hunt, when those tags in less than 24 hours, there was over $400,000 generated just in application fees for wolves. And that does not to mention these extremely rural areas that benefit from tourism and benefit from the outdoors, from hotels to restaurants to bars to gas stations to everything. The financial impact that is realized, and that's the reality of it, because we see it from deer, we see it from turkey, we see it from grouse, we see it from bears, everything. Why can't the wolf be on that same? If we truly want to manage all of our wildlife to the level, the wolf is an apex predator that does probably need some special management, but we're just not ready, and we're not doing it right now.
And to that effect, okay, so let's go take that one step further. I'm going to close on this. Let's pretend that you don't care about the hunting aspect. Let's pretend you don't care about the money aspect. Let's push that all aside. Let's just say that you're sitting out there listening to this Deer Talk Now podcast, which I'd scratch my head if you're listening just for this reason, but you are only concerned about wildlife health, and you are concerned about the spread of chronic wasting disease. Guess what is the largest carriers of chronic wasting disease? Wolves. So wolves eat deer. We know that they travel up to 250 miles in a fall/winter, and they're pooping on the landscape as they go. Guess what they're spreading? They're spreading infectious prions that could spread to other disease. So that's why I say the wolf, Ted gave this, the wolf deserves more in the fact that nothing is going to manage it except us. And if we are truly concerned about the entire wildlife ecosystem, everybody needs to stand up and say, yes, this needs to be managed. I think that would be a good way of
I
summing
completely agree with you. And this is a whole nother topic, down the road. But that's the one thing that the pro-wolf anti-hunters are, that's their biggest thing. Well, they only prey on the sick and the weak and the dying. So your chronic wasting, levels decrease because they only harvest. And we know that it's true. Of course, easier prey is easier. But look at what the other numbers are. Easier prey look at our depredation numbers. Our livestock numbers are up. Our pet numbers are up. You look at the numbers right now. So far this year, we've had 6 dogs killed so far. Only one of them was a pet. The other 5 were hounds.
Let me stop you there for a second.
And I know.
You know where I was going with this.
I do.
That is a liberal talk. I'm not saying you. That is a liberal talking point. 5 dogs were killed, but only one was a pet. No, BS. Yeah. All of those were pets. You ask any guy who has a coon dog or a bear dog or a wolf dog. That dog's got a name. That's not Fluffy. It's probably Brutus or something like that. Yeah. But they try to make that like it was just a hunting hound.
Nope. Yeah, it's your fault. You're in their territory. I get it. I'm going to the Bear Hunters Convention this weekend in Wausau, and talk to those guys, men and women, and say that it's a hound when you got $7,000 into it and you train it and it lives at your house. And I do agree with you. They classify it that way. I still keep it as dogs in general. So when I'm running the number, but when you look at those depredations, we just had one a couple days ago where the owner came up on it. It wasn't consumed. It died on the way, but it's staggering the number of pets that were lost. Horses, miniature horses, donkeys. This woman in Woodruff had her Chihuahua taken from her feet next to a Great Dane. And these are coming in her backyard. The number of full-grown cows, heifers, steers, it used to just be the calves. It's not anymore. And so, once these animals realize, and I'm trying to tie this back into the CWD thing, is that a wolf clearly doesn't know a deer has CWD. Obviously, they take it because it's weak and it's slow and it's easier to kill. Well, you know what else is? Cows, horses, pets. So, add in the reduced population of deer that you see in the northern areas, and B, the farming that takes place up there. A penned animal is certainly easier to take down than chasing a whitetail through the woods. So you start to get these wolves that are conditioned. This is exactly what we saw in Colorado from those wolves that came from Oregon. Those were from known depredation packs, and they're doing what they do. And that's what wolves do what they do. They kill animals. You're right. But we need to do what we do too to help that conservation. We're the conservation. Hunters, trappers are the true conservationists because we're looking out for the management of all wildlife, not just pro-wolf, anti-hunting animal rights activists.
Amen. Thank you, Chris, so much. Chris, where can people go to find out more about Hunter Nation and how they can become involved?
Yeah, go to hunternation.org. Again, we're a national organization. On social media, we've got Hunter Nation on LinkedIn. We've got a Hunter Nation main page on Facebook and on Instagram. I have a private group, a Hunter Nation Wisconsin page on Facebook. You can join that and follow us along. I can always be reached via email, chris@hunternation.org. Remember, it's .org, not .com for both our websites. if you're a member of Wisconsin Bear Hunters Association, I'll be there this weekend. We have a large event in Ashland coming up on the 30th. You can get all the details on how to attend their free event where Congressman Tiffany and Senator Staff Schultz and Senator Quinn and a lot of Assemblyman Green will all be there. So it'll be an open forum Q&A. Keith Mark, our founder and president, will be there as well to speak. So that's in Ashland on the 30th. But go to hunternation.org to find out, become a member, very reasonable. And we're here to fight for you across the board. I handle Wisconsin, but we're active in many states
in
as
every
well.
most every state, from what I understand. And we're gonna have we're gonna have Keith on here actually
Yes.
right next. So that's awesome. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. We really
I
appreciate
appreciate it, and my pleasure. Anytime. Thank you.
Okay, for Chris Vaughan from Hunter Nation, I am Dan Schmidt. Thank you for joining us. All we ask you to do is like and subscribe and comment. List those comments, and we will actually answer them on our new free-for-all podcast that we have here once a month. We will catch you next week for another episode of Deer Talk Now. The Deer Talk Now podcast is brought to you by Mossberg, Wildlife Research Center, Traditions Firearms, Outdoor Edge Knives, Hoyt Archery, and 10 Point Crossbow.